Hi, I'm Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. I found this very old storybook. I have not even opened it up yet, so I don't know what we will find inside. But it says the Great Big Storybook, so I assume there'll be lots of good stories in here we can read. Copyright 1897. Very, very old. So I'm not going to discuss it. We'll just read some stories. So get cozy. I have my big fluffy sweatshirt on because it's freezing cold here. And a big cozy blanket. So if you want to pause and get a hot tea or a hot toddy. The Great Big Storybook. It's a beautiful illustration too. I'm worried about it. Hold on, let me grab. Put this underneath, maybe. The Great Big Storybook. The Skaters. Out upon the icy pond, lads are skating to and fro, lasses too, brunette and blonde, aided by some gallant beau. Merry changes now are making, many a graceful curve and throw, fear and care alike forsaking in this hour of healthful glow. Snow is falling, what care they? Youthful blood is coursing fast. Feet are nimble, hearts are gay, like a zephyr seems the blast. As it stirs the cheek with bloom, sparkles bright the joyous eye, while around their icy room, hand in hand, they swiftly fly. Thus upon the smooth fine glass they will linger yet awhile, now in couplets, now to pass into independent file, till at length home's bounteous fare, stealing through their thoughts so sly, giving their appetites a prayer, which they fain would gratify. A new Santa Claus. I'll save that one for Christmas time. If I were only a kitten, how jolly and nice 'twould be to play about in the sunshine and run up the tallest tree. I never should hem the towels, nor sew any buttons on. I never should have to stay in school till the brightest hours were gone. Sometimes, though, I should be busy making a marble roll, or sitting, if I were hungry, to watch by a mouse's hole. But if I were feeling lazy, I'd curl myself in a ball and lie all day by the fire with nothing to do at all. But, dear, I hadn't most forgotten, if I were only a cat, I couldn't be Mama's girlie. Now, what do you think about that? I'll work and I'll study bravely, always to hear her say, "My own little darling daughter, you have been good today." What Puss Heard. They were sitting before the open fire in the twilight, telling fairy stories. Suddenly, Puss, who had been sleeping upon the rug, waked and climbed on the pile of locust wood that lay near the hearth and listened. She hears a mouse in the wainscot, they said. Hush! All were silent. Presently, Puss returned to the rug, but she could have only a catnap before she was scampering over the woodpile again. A beautiful blue and black butterfly flew up into the warm firelight as if it had mistaken it for summer weather. I call that a fairy story, said the children. Puss had heard the butterfly break the chrysalis. A ride on the elevated railroad. Johnny, when his mamma told him she was going to take him with her to New York, was a very happy little boy. He asked a great many questions as to how they would go and what he would see in the great city. Mamma told him about a great sound steamer and the cunning little bed in which he would sleep on the passage. Then she described Central Park with its beautiful walks and drives, and the museum and the wild animals. She also spoke of electric cars which ran up Broadway, but there was one curious thing she forgot to say a word about. So when Johnny came out on 6th Avenue and saw the cars on the elevated railway, the little boy was frightened and clung to his mamma, exclaiming, "Oh, mamma, mamma, see those cars way up in the air? Suppose they should fall down." But his mother took him into a store and let him watch the little trains pass to and fro, while explaining to him that the railroad was strong and safely built. Then she proposed taking a ride on it. At first, Johnny objected. Then he began thinking it must be fun to ride up so high. When he was once seated in the cars and glided swiftly along above the street, he clapped his hands with delight. Every day after that, Johnny wanted to ride on the elevated railway and did so several times. When he returned home, he told Papa all about it, adding, "And just think, Papa, we could peep right into folks' rooms upstairs, and the horses were all underneath us, and it was so jolly. I wasn't frightened a bit." "20 Little Poultices." It never would have happened if Mother had not gone away and the twins had not been left by themselves, because Hannah was preserving, and if that grindstone had not been left out in the yard. But Mother had gone. Hannah was busy. The grindstone was there, and it did happen, this naughty thing. The twins were sitting on the doorstep eating bread and serves that Hannah had given them. It was very warm and quiet, and there was not a thing to do. The bees were busy out there in the clover, but then they were bees and did not know any better fun than to work all day. It was Dell who began it. She always did begin things, and Belle had to follow. She finished her bread first and sat trying to think of something to play. Then she saw that grindstone and said, "Oh, Belle, let's grind." Belle swallowed her last bite quickly and followed Dell to the grindstone. Now they did not seem to remember that someone, Mamma perhaps, had said, "Never touch the grindstone, little girls." Belle did begin to remember when suddenly there was Dell turning that lovely stone with both hands. Of course, Belle had to get a knife and hold it to grind. They ground 2 knives, which they got from the kitchen. When Hannah's back was turned, then they ground the hoe till it was awful sharp, and some of the points off the handsaw. Then Belle said, "Let's grind our fingernails." They turned the stone and held their fingers on it, and at first it felt funny and ticklish. When they stopped, oh dear, the tips of every one of those poor little fingers were sore indeed, for they had ground the skin right off, and the blood came. They ran crying to Hannah, and what do you think she did? Why, she put a little poultice of bread and milk on every one of those fingers and thumbs of each naughty hand. The twins were so ashamed to have Mamma see those hands, when they had promised to be so good. When she came home at night, 2 sorry little girls met her with their hands behind their backs, and when she asked what was the matter with her birdies, they sorrowfully told her, they sorrowfully held up those 20 little poultices. The Weed and Worm Garden. Ethel, Lyman, and Douglas went into the country one summer with their auntie. She had a very large garden full of beautiful flowers. "Oh," they cried when they saw it, "if we could only have a garden." "You may have gardens," said their auntie, "if you will take care of them and not let the weeds grow." They promised that they would, and she gave them 3 little plots of ground side by side. Then she told them they must hoe and spade them up. They said they could not because they had no tools. So she took them to the store and bought them each a hoe, a rake, a spade, and a fork. They worked hard for a day or 2 and got the ground very nice and fine. Their auntie was pleased and said they might choose what flowers they would have. Douglas said he wanted cornflowers because he remembered the story about a little boy and girl who took the cornflowers to the king. Ethel said she would prefer scarlet geraniums, for her mamma wore them when she went to see the president. But Lyman thought they ought to be alike, and so the others agreed. Auntie gave them each 2 choice roses, a heliotrope, plenty of geraniums, pinks, lantanas, cornflowers, and many others they fancied. The little gardens looked lovely when the plants were all set out and the seeds began to come up, but the weeds came up also, and the children were puzzled to know the weeds from the flowers. Auntie showed them, and they worked faithfully until one morning Lyman went out and found an army of worms eating up his roses. He picked off a few, but more came, and the weeds were so thick he grew quite discouraged. "I'll have a weed and worm garden," said he. "It's so much easier." "Very well," replied Auntie. "Do you think weeds and worms would make a nice bouquet for Mama's birthday?" He hung his head and looked as though he didn't care. After that, the worms and the weeds had it all their own way. The very last of August came, and Papa said the children must be at home on the 5th of September to celebrate Mama's birthday. Then Lyman felt very badly, for while Ethel and Douglas had lovely flowers to carry her, he had scarcely a single blossom fit to offer. The gardener pitied him so much that he said he would give the little boy a bouquet from his greenhouse, but Auntie would not allow it. She said he must learn not to be so lazy again, and Lyman says himself that when he has another garden, it shall grow something beside weeds and worms. Tabby and Josie. Papa was on the back porch smoking a cigar. Little John was playing nearby with a pretty wind-wheel Papa had made for him. Across the way, two children were holding a yellow and white kitten by the tail. Kitty struggled to get away. By and by she did get away and ran to Johnny's papa, who stroked her gently, saying, "Poor kitty, poor kitty." Johnny gave her a saucer of milk, and she ran up and down the piazza for a bit of beef tied to a string. She lay down to rest after she had swallowed the meat and part of the string, which Mama had to pull out of her throat. "She is such a homely cat. I don't want her here," said Mama. "She is a beauty," replied Papa. "Let her stay." "She is Tabby Wilson," said John. Nobody could tell why our 6-year-old called the new cat Tabby Wilson, but she goes by that name. Tabby Wilson said John's house was good enough for her to live in, so she thought she would stay. When Tabby Wilson had been with John a few days, in walked a dirty black and white kitten. She was very thin and sick-looking, and Tabby Wilson flew at her, growling and spitting, with her paw raised to strike her. "Let Josie Brooks alone, Tabby Wilson," screamed John, taking up the poor little kitten and stroking her. "I shall not," mewed Tabby Wilson, and she flew at her. But John took the new kitten into the kitchen and gave her some milk. So Josie Brooks and Tabby Wilson became our cats. After a while, Tab and Joe became quite good friends and played together. John harnessed them to a pasteboard box. "Get up," he cried. "I shall not," spit Tabby. "Nor I either," growled Josie. They ran under a chair and crouched close together. "They won't drive, Mama," whined little Joe, coming close to Mama. "They are ungrateful quadrupeds, then," said Mama. "Quadrupeds, Mama? What are they?" asked John, stopping his whining at once. How many feet has Tabby Wilson? Asked Mamma. John seized Tabby and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very well, said Mamma. If she has 4 feet, she is a quadruped. And is Josie Brooks a quadruped too? Count her feet and see. Yes, she has 4, so she is a quadruped. But what am I, Mamma? I have but 2 feet. You are a biped, dear, and so is Papa. John threw himself on the floor, kicked his heels into the air, holding Tabby Wilson and singing, My kitty is a quadruped, 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 but I am a biped.